Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have join us Bill High. Bill is the executive chairman and founder of Signatry. He is an expert in the area of generosity and helping individuals and business owners and families be more generous. He's got some great thoughts to share, lessons learned from his own life and personal story. Looking forward to today's conversation with Bill. Bill, can you, I guess, first off, give us just a little bit of your story, a little bit of your career history?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got an undergraduate degree from the University of Missouri. So if you're from the Midwest, you'll appreciate this. I was able to graduate early, and so 3.5 years. And then while I was actually teaching school, I went and I taught school for a semester. But during that semester that I was teaching school, I ended up applying to law school, and the last law school I applied to was the University of Kansas. So those two schools are arch rivals, and University of Kansas gave me a full ride scholarship. So I went and ended up practicing law for 12 years, big law firm, one of the top law firms across the country, frankly, but it just grew dramatically while I was there. I was 12 years, had become a partner in the law firm. And in the course of doing that, started getting involved in urban ministry. So inner city kind of stuff, the heart of the heart, the really difficult stuff. And in the course of that, while we were doing that, we had a group of people that were involved with that said, hey, Bill, you and your team, you guys really need to figure out a way to raise more money for ministry. And so we looked at a lot of different models and ultimately stumbled into this world of the donor advised fund world. So I was the guy that got picked to go start a donor advised fund organization, which at that time, it was still a small, sleepy little world, if you will. And so that ultimately became what was the start of the Signatry, and that was our venture into the donor advised fund world. Here we are 21 years later, and more than almost 5 billion in contributions and 4 billion in grants out.
Wow, that's great. Well, talk a little bit about, you've got a personal story of that you're passionate about what you do and but I think you've got a really interesting background and kind of take us back to kind of your childhood and some of the things that kind of shaped you.
Yeah. So you've probably heard, Mark, the adage that wherever your deepest wound is where the flower grows. And so in my case, the wounding was really in the context of family. I grew up in a very poor family. My dad was the oldest of 8. He grew up in a 3-room log cabin in the hills of the Ozarks. They literally were the dead end at the bottom of the holler. And so his big objective was to get out of there. And so he joined the service, went overseas to Japan post-Korean War, and ended up meeting my mom there, brought her back here to the States, had 6 kids. I was number 5 out of 6. But it was a cycle of poverty. I mean, we were a welfare family. Salvation Army brought us Christmas gifts and the like. They weren't very good Christmas gifts, to be honest. But it was a tough background. I mean, there were days literally where we'd go look inside the refrigerator and there was nothing there, hardly anything at all. Then my dad died when I was 12. Fortunately, what had happened is that there had been a family down the street who brought us a children's Bible storybook. And that was really my beginning into the world of faith, that there was a God and that I wasn't, that I needed help, that I needed a redeemer. So that was the big turning point for me. So in the midst of my father passing away, I had this great gift of new life and the fact that I could have life beyond this life. So that's the journey.
Very cool story. We have a lot of our listeners are first-time leaders. They may be first-time CEOs in either a corporation or a nonprofit. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you, if you're able to spin back time and go back and talk to a 22-year-old Bill, what advice would you give him?
Yeah, funny, Mark, you asked that question because I actually wrote a blog on this. What would be the lessons or the letters you would write to your 20-year-old self? And one of the things that I would say, just very practically speaking, is one, just to really understand who you are. Over the past number of years, because of the work that I do with so many businesses and families, we end up doing a lot of assessments, personality profiles, strength finders, love languages, just helping people understand how they're wired. Because once you understand who you are, it can be a lot more comforting about who you are exactly. I came into the business space and the leadership role not necessarily believing that I was going to be that guy. I was always the reluctant leader because I didn't come from a background of leadership. I came from a very poor, weak background. So I tended to see myself as not a leader. And it wasn't until I got pushed into those leadership roles, but also where I began to understand just how God had wired me up, the personality profiles and that I'm like, no, I actually can lead. So one of those first lessons is really take the time to really investigate your own identity. We say that you need to understand your shape, your spiritual gifts, your heart and passion, your abilities and strengths, personality and life experience. And when you can understand how you are shaped, then you can understand how to integrate with others. But then that second part of that narrative is don't accept the narrative that the rest of the world may put upon you, because I certainly was a kid that people would have said, oh, that guy's not going to amount to being a leader, or he's too quiet to be a leader. And it wasn't until I began flexing those leadership muscles that I actually understood that I could lead. I just needed to lead within my own distinctive style.
So thinking of leaders that, and you rub shoulders with a lot of high net worth individuals that have been successful in business and in life, but think back as far as kind of the leaders that you worked with and how that they've maybe put into their culture of their organizations, that culture of generosity. Has that been kind of a pattern you've seen as far as the people that you've worked with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there are actually studies on this, Mark. If you want to be successful as a leader, it's counterintuitive, but the most successful leaders that I know are the most generous leaders. Mm. And what we tend to be taught is the idea that, gosh, if I accumulate more and if I wait to be generous, then I'll actually be positioned in the future to be generous. But man, if you don't start now, then you won't be generous later. One of the folks that we've worked with over time has been David Green, the CEO and founder of Hobby Lobby. And we wrote a book with him called Giving It All Away. And in the book, he actually recounts part of his leadership journey. Well, one of the parts of that leadership journey was actually moving to a place where they give away 50% of their profit. Now, think about that. Does that sound like good business? Make money and give half of it to organizations that in theory aren't going to give you a return on your investment. But that's exactly what they do. But it was an evolutionary journey to get there. And by far, Mark, I think you appreciate this. The leaders that elevate their organizations, without a doubt, the happiest leaders by far are the ones who are the most generous. The root word of generous, by the way, goes back to the Latin and even to a French idea of nobility. And so those people who want to live a noble life are truly generous.
Talk a little bit about the idea of legacy. And we talked a little bit before we got started around kind of your thoughts around that, but expand that as far as of what a legacy is.
Yeah, and I think it's really important up front to state that what most people think about legacy is they always hear it in plan giving presentations, or maybe their lawyer talks about it as leave a legacy behind. And for a lot of the business people that we work with, that's not that attractive. They're forward thinking, forward looking kind of people. And the dictionary definition of legacy on the one hand is that idea, leave some property and money behind to your heirs. But I think the bigger idea around legacy is not as much what you leave behind, but it's what you put in motion. What are the things that are going to still carry on long after you're gone? Again, we know that the most successful leaders aren't just the ones that are thinking about who the next successor is, but they're thinking of 5 generations down the line. And ultimately, because I'm a person of faith, I believe that there is this idea of heaven and that we will get to be in heaven. It's that idea of what are all the people and the ideas and the families, the people that we've touched, those lives that we will get to see as a result of these things that we've done with whatever's been put in our hands. So I think that's the bigger idea of legacy. It's that stuff that we get to put in motion.
So we have some nonprofit leaders that, and one of the biggest things that's on their mind as far as is making sure that they have the funds necessary in order to do the work and the resources necessary. What are some trends that you're seeing in that whole area of philanthropy and giving, and what are some things that organizations need to be thinking about?
Yeah, we wrote a book actually on this as well, Mark, a few years back, and it's called Charity Shock: 10 Trends Facing the Nonprofit World. And the short of it is that while 2020, oddly enough, for many nonprofits proved to be an incredible year in the midst of the pandemic, giving went up for a lot of nonprofits. But one of the fundamental things that we know demographically is that the nonprofit world must pay attention to the major donor. You've got to cultivate relationships with major donors, business owners in particular, because ultimately we will see a decline in giving as some of the new tax policies go into effect. But then also demographically, we'll end up moving away from a boomer generation that's been very generous to Gen X that frankly is smaller, so there's fewer of them. And the millennials are still getting their feet wet in terms of establishing themselves in the business world. So that we're going to see there will be a giving decline, but the relationships with major donors can actually sustain and carry some of the nonprofit world. So that's why we have to think about endowment. One of the other trends that we're encouraging nonprofits to take a look at is earned income. How do you actually establish programs that make you money and don't just rely upon donations? So those are a few big ideas.
Yeah. And you started a software as a service company that we interviewed Ray Gary not that long ago, and talk a little bit about kind of just some of the unique things that you saw that was necessary as far as with starting that company.
Yeah, we started I Donate, frankly, as a result of nonprofits coming to us and saying, you need to solve a problem for us, which is how do we take in donations online in an efficient manner? And we want to not only be able to take in cash gifts, credit card gifts, but also we need to make sure we can do publicly traded stock gifts online in a fast, efficient manner. And then we had some nonprofits that needed and wanted to be able to do things like vehicles and those kind of gifts as well. So ultimately, we created I Donate as one of those opportunities to earn revenue, but also to solve a problem in the nonprofit space. So today, it's a company that's competing with some of the largest platforms in the country and winning. So it's those kind of innovative ideas and ultimately our aim is still how do we capture as much available to advance the nonprofit world, solve some of the world's greatest problems. That's how we say it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what people can do as families to be a generous family. I was talking with a CEO that was CEO of a Fortune 100 company, and he said one of the things that they did was that every year they, as a family, kind of allowed their kids to pick a charity or some nonprofit that they could give to and really think about as far as kind of what was going to be kind of their impact, and to kind of train their kids to think about giving, not just receiving at the holidays. But talk a little bit about some things that you've seen that have been helpful for families.
Yeah, so practically speaking, one of the very first things that we say to those families is you need to establish the family fund or the family foundation. So this is where most people would set up the donor advised fund. That's what the Signatry is. We're a donor advised fund organization. But the reason why we start there is if all you do is you're giving out of your checkbook, and you don't ever have any money set aside for the family to give, then you're always going to have some competing priorities. But as when I can go and sit down with my kids and say, hey guys, we've got the High Family Charitable Fund, and it's set up, we've got some money set aside for us to be able to give away. That is one of the first things to be in a place where you can have conversations around your values. So the example of your CEO is that once you've got those dollars allocated, whether it's $1,000 or whether it's 100,000, you can go to the kids and say, hey guys, we're going to give away X amount, and you can allocate it to them based upon their age and say, hey, each of you guys, $100 per age. That's actually how we started as our own family. That's one way to do it, is you let them give out of your fund. As our kids got older, we use something called grant certificates. And so we go to each of the kids and say, hey, you've got X amount of dollars to give away. Sometimes we do some giving together. So this year we're funding a project where we hope to be funding an adoption together as a family, and even all the kids are participating. On a fun side of thing, one thing that we encourage people to do is have a random generosity day or have a random generosity season. So go to each of your kids and say, hey, here's $100 or $50, whatever the number is that you deem adequate, and go at Thanksgiving and sit down and say, we're all going to give away $100 before Christmas. And all your only requirement is to find a person in need. And then when you feel nudged, make the gift and say, hey, God bless you. We just wanted to make this gift to you because this is from our family and we believe that this is a good thing. And go do that and then share the story. So those are a few ideas that we just like to see in the context of families. But again, we know that if the family is going to be successful, one of the keys is to actually encourage that family to be generous.
Great. Yeah, that's great thoughts and great ways to put it in action. What books would you recommend to a leader, if you were to any that you recommend on a regular basis to people that are in leadership?
Yeah, so one of the, obviously I've been a Lencioni fan, and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I really like that idea of the necessity of communication and trust. It fits right inside of the wheelhouse of what we do. Related to that, because so many leaders, David Green says it this way, he says it's far easier to build a business than it is a family. And so we encourage people to actually do some of that same kind of intentional study around family. So there's a good book out there by a guy named James Hughes called Family Wealth, and it talks about some of these kind of principles. I participated in a couple other books called Unheritage and Unprepared. Both of those talk about family wealth kind of ideas, because if you're going to have a successful business, almost always you're going to need to have a successful family. So those are a handful of things that we try to take a look at. One of my favorite books, by the way, of all time is a book by John Piper called Don't Waste Your Life. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that book in my mind is one of the all-time great ones, because it really does ask you that pivotal question: what are you investing in? The things that you're investing in that are going to last beyond this life.
Okay. Any favorite quotes that are on your list of top quotes?
Well, one of the simple ones is, because we do so much of this family work, is we say to that business leader is, you are going to have a family meeting. The only question is whether you're going to be in that meeting. And the necessity of starting now with your family and just talking about the things that matter, pass on things more than just financial wealth, the intellectual, social, spiritual, emotional capital. When we focus on those kind of things holistically, it helps us grow in our organizations, but it helps us grow inside of our families as well.
So outside of work, Bill, what do you do to recharge? I know you have family, so I'm sure that's part of it, but what else do you do to recharge?
Well, one of the simple things that I do just on a day-by-day basis is I do journal. So I have a daily devotional. I try to do some daily reading. So I try to read through the Bible each year, but I always couple that with journaling. And so I've always heard that some of the great thinkers and people of our time were always people who journaled. So I've journaled for 30 plus years. So that's just one of the places of being quiet that really helps me and gets my thoughts down on paper. And then I love being outside. So getting outside, working outside. We have a little bit of property that we're trying to really work on a legacy space for our kids and our grandkids now. So some of that physical energy like that. Still hit the gym most every day. So those are a handful of things.
Okay. What parting advice would you give to a new or up and coming leader?
So the big thing is don't be in a hurry. You know what? The 20s is a great time for you to learn. Years ago, I was at a conference and a guy shared this with me. He says, man, take your 20s to learn. Get equipped, learn all that you can. And then in your 30s, be okay with the idea that you're still beginning to lay the footings and the beginnings of the foundation. And by your 40s, you'll start to get some of that establishing kind of idea. But what I've always heard, and I think totally makes sense, is that by age 55 to 75 are your most productive years, because by that time you've been beat around enough, you've made enough stupid mistakes, but you've also had enough success to know that that success was never just based on you. It was always the people that were around you. So I just see so many people try to drive to early success without learning some of the lessons along the way. So be patient, slow down, take a big deep breath and say, it's okay. I'll get it figured out and God's gracious with me.
Great. Well, I appreciate you sharing some thoughts today, and I know this is going to be helpful, but how would someone learn more about kind of what you are working on and your organization?
Yeah, they can hit our website, www.thesignatry.com, thesignatry.com. That's one website. And then I have a personal website where I do some of that writing on legacy and generosity. And that website is billhigh.com. So if they hit billhigh.com, they also see some of the writings that I have, some of the books that I've participated in that I've helped write or written by myself, along with a lot of the blog content. And they can also sign up for newsletters on either one of those sites.
Great. Well, thanks, Bill. This has been a lot of fun, and I wish you continued success in all your ventures, and that people will become more generous because of some of the thoughts you shared with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.